This is the story of how believing in ghosts left me vulnerable to the attacks of a demon, how I eventually brought the demon to my house, and how I got rid of him. I grew up in the church and still believe in God. I may not be in full practice of my faith, but I have had my own life experiences proving His existence in my life. I know God is on my side, and with His help, I keep on fighting this battle. I hope to warn everyone about the danger of incubus and succubus demons, and any demonic force that gives sexual pleasures to humans. For those who don't know, here's a brief description of those types of demons. An incubus is a male demon that seeks out women to have sex with. A succubus is a female demon who has sex with men. It all started at a time in my life when I had started watching shows about ghost hunting and was very much obsessed with the subject. I met an older lady on a website for paranormal activities and we became friends. This lady claimed she had several ghosts on her property and she even saw and talked to them. She claimed she was a medium. I was more open to believing her at that point in my life. I even heard a ghostly voice on her phone. No one could have duplicated that voice. It was such a faint and off in the distance kind of sound. I really enjoyed her company, so I planned to go stay at her house for a visit. After I arrived at her home, my friend took me to an old house next to hers that had been abandoned for years. She brought me inside the house to have an experience, and I did. My friend told me the ghost was of a man who killed his neighbor's kids and who was supposedly still living in that small house. I could tell the spirit did not like me judging him for his past sins. When I got angry with the ghost, a computer tower flew into the back of my leg. My friend was in front of me when it happened. There was no way she could have done it. I really started to believe my friend when I got a few pictures through an air vent. Something told me to look down, and that's when I took pictures of the man's face. They were pretty scary looking pictures. I would share them, but unfortunately the quality of the photos was pretty bad since I didn't have the flash on. For the next couple of days I felt amused by the ghostly adventure and just enjoyed being with my new friend. I had no idea what lay in store. On day 3 of my visit, I was laying in my bed trying to sleep, and I felt a sensation in my private area. It felt really good, and it kept feeling really good. I had no idea what was going on, but I soon found out the next day when I told my friend what had happened. My friend explained that her house was haunted by a ghost named Ramon, a soldier that died on her property in the French and Indian War. She also told me her son-in-law had been attacked by a female ghost, which is why I first started researching the subject of sex and ghosts. Throughout my stay, that ghost was communicating with me. My friend recorded him speaking to me at her house. I would ask questions to try to get him on the recorder, and we caught him on tape twice. When we listened really carefully, we could hear a voice on the tape saying,
"I love you."
In the room I stayed in, before I went to bed, I also heard the spirit say he loved me. Was he a ghost or a demon? I believed it was a ghost then, but now, I think he was a demon. I believed my friend's story about the ghost from the French and Indian War, but part of me did not understand how a ghost could have this power to sexually assault a human. On the last day I was at her house, she asked me, "Do you want to take it home with you?" "Sure, I can take it home," I said jokingly. She responded, "Seriously, you can take it home with you? Go ahead. Tell Ramon to go home with you." So I spoke to the house around me. "Ramon," I said, "it's okay if you want to come home with me." Once home, I set the house rules and asked for the spirit not to sexually come to me when my husband was home. But even though I wanted him to, he did not come to me once. It was the weirdest thing. I knew he was there because he revealed himself through practical jokes. He would constantly make noises and turn lights off. I realized I needed more information, so I started to research having sex with ghosts and stumbled upon a link for incubus and succubus demons that piqued my curiosity. It described demonic sexual attackers that come to victims while they are sleeping. As I kept reading and researching the subject, I came to the realization that my spirit was not a ghost, but a demon. Partly, I think God showed me this through a negative sense I had started to feel about this demon's presence in my life. I first tried to send it away through the help of a friend who claimed she could send ghosts to the light over the phone. I still don't believe that, but I tried her because I was desperate and needed to try something. My friend told me to just ask it to leave, but I still felt a presence in my house even after she claimed she had helped it to move on. I felt an evil, eerie presence, so I sought a minister to come to my house to pray for my protection and bless the house. After the minister came, I was free of bad feelings for a while. But just recently, they have come back. I'm worried, but at least I know now that I have God on my side as I fight this battle. To all who summon demons to have sex with you, be careful. You may think you're in charge, but you're not. They are in charge, and you may be hurt by the thing that gives you sexual pleasure. For example, I read about a man who was lonely and saw an article on how to summon a succubus demon. Now he is addicted to a female demon who pleasures him. He has lost his soul and faith due to his sexual addiction. This man is so happy with his succubus that he doesn't even want to meet a real woman and have real sex anymore. I do not encourage this. Why trust a demon? I feel that now it's my mission to inform the world of incubus and succubus demons, and I will pray for others out there, because it is becoming normal to some to do just what this man did, summon a demon to pleasure him. How perverse and stupid. Luckily, there are already many ministries spreading the word. The minister who I sought for deliverance told me another member of his church has had many sexual attacks and still fights off the incubus demon. She even goes to the extreme as to put a Bible between her legs to rebuke the enemy. I'm not sure why she keeps having attacks. I never had more than the one attack. Thank God. I made myself vulnerable to attack because of my belief in ghosts. I truly believe that's why the incubus came into my life. After all, it was only after I got into paranormal ghost stuff that I was attacked. I'm not being closed-minded when I tell you I believe every ghost out there is really a demon. If you choose to debate me, just research what demons do in people's lives. They deceive us. Why wouldn't a demon deceive a lot of people to make them think they are a ghost? You can show me all the ghost pictures you have, and I won't change my mind. The picture I have of that man is truly a demonic photo. The face was scary, with darked-out eyes and a weird-looking expression. So my advice to you is, stay away from ghosts, demons, and other paranormal stuff. Incubus and succubus demons exist. What you think is a ghost could easily be a demon trying to trick you. My experience is not unusual. If you do your homework and research the subject, you will find thousands of people, maybe millions, all over the world, dealing with the same situation. This happened a few years ago, after a rehearsal dinner for a friend's wedding. The dinner was held at a little lodge, basically a metal shed, in the middle of nowhere Midwest. There was nothing but fields for miles in all directions. This lodge was about 15 miles away from the motel we were all staying at, so we all tried our best to stay sober enough to drive back. The guy I was rooming with had one too many, and was told he couldn't drive his car back. But being a drunk a-hole, he just slipped outside and took off in his car around 11 p.m. About 30 minutes later, I head back to the motel room, expecting to find my roomie already sleeping. Instead, the motel room is empty. I didn't really think much about it. I figured he had found one of the local watering holes and was having some late night fun, so I went to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I get woken up to him finally walking in. I'm ready to give him some hell about drinking so much the night before our buddy's wedding, but I stop when I see him. His face was white. He had obviously been crying, and he was shaking like a leaf. I immediately asked him what's wrong. After he had left the lodge, he had taken a few wrong turns and had gotten lost down some old gravel roads. He realized it had been a mistake for him to try to drive in his drunken state, so he decides to try to find some place to pull off and sleep for an hour or two. After driving for a while, he saw a patch of trees in the distance with a gravel driveway leading up to it. He pulls into the driveway and sees that the patch of trees has a grown-over foundation in the middle of it. He figures this would be a good place to rest, so he turns his car off and closes his eyes. He wasn't sure how long he was asleep when he was woken up to a loud tapping on the driver's side window. He jumped to attention, looked over, and saw a woman in her mid-40s wearing a nightgown, leaning over looking in his window. He thought that this woman must have been driving by and stopped to make sure he was okay. So he rolled down his window to explain his situation, hoping that she wouldn't call the cops. Before he could say anything, though, the woman leaned through the open window, getting so close to his face, he could feel her lips on his cheek, and she whispers, "Please, leave." She then stood up and started walking down the driveway toward the old foundation. He didn't think twice. He started his car and reversed out of the driveway. As he was pulling onto the road, he looked back down the driveway. Where the old foundation had been just seconds before, there was now a small farmhouse. The windows were broken. The exterior was bare wood, as if the paint had long worn off, and the roof sagged in the middle. As he tried to wrap his mind around what he was seeing, he noticed that staring at him out of a window on the second floor was the woman who had just spoken to him. He put his car in drive and floored it down random gravel roads, scared out of his mind, until he found the highway and made it back to the motel. He left for home the next morning. I had to explain to our friends why one of the groomsmen had to leave. I just told everyone he had caught a bad flu. We don't ever talk about what happened that night. When I was a kid, I lived a few blocks away from my aunt's house. Since it was in walking distance, it wasn't uncommon for me to walk there on the weekends to visit my cousins. They were both girls and a little bit younger than myself, and even though I was older and a boy, we still got along pretty well. Typically on weekends we'd just hang out and watch cartoons, or maybe raid the cupboard for some cereal. They always seemed to have better stuff than what my mom bought. The younger of the two was the quieter one. She really didn't seem to have a lot of friends, unless you count the imaginary one she always seemed to talk to. At least that's what I always chalked this up to. You see, it really wasn't uncommon for her to go upstairs to the attic and sit up there by herself. I never really gave it that much thought. I figured that was just a normal part of adolescence, to have an imaginary friend, or maybe to have periods where you like solitude and just being by yourself. But every time she came down from the attic, she always insisted, and she sounded completely sincere when she said this, that she had been spending time up there with her friend. I'd always ask her about her friend and inquire what her name was, but I'd never really get a straight answer. She'd just get super shy and then keep completely silent. Again, I always just chalked this up to one of those imaginary friend things. I mean, even I had an imaginary friend at one point, but it was something I got over pretty quickly. But as time went on, instead of getting better about this imaginary friend of hers, things actually got progressively worse. What I mean by that is, she didn't seem to get over it. Instead, she started to talk more and more about her imaginary friend. After a while, she even started describing what she looked like. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the dress that she wore, things like that. Considering how young she was at the time, I thought she had quite an incredible imagination, because her description of this girl was very specific, and it never really changed. It was always consistent. Always the same hair, the same eyes, the same clothing, every single time. It almost became a running joke between my brothers and I. We even started teasing her about it, asking her when she was going to start getting over her imaginary friend and move on with life. In retrospect, yeah, it seemed kind of mean, but honestly, the stories that she kept sharing started to become tiresome. It was almost annoying. Maybe I was being a bit harsh back then. By the time I was 10 years old, we had moved to a different house, and as such, we didn't visit my cousins as much anymore. And when we did, I never brought up the imaginary friend with my cousin. I never made any mention of it. To be honest, she stopped talking about it too, but I think that was only because we used to tease her so badly about it. By the time I was in my early 20s, my aunt had moved out of that house and into a different one. And since the place was for rent, and I had a lot of fond memories there, I decided to move in. I want to say I had only been in there for maybe a few weeks, when I started hearing banging noises coming from the attic. This wasn't something that bothered me that much, and I really wasn't that concerned about it. It really wasn't uncommon for things like squirrels or other animals to get inside people's attics. I always figured that's what it was, so I never really did much investigating, unless you count going up there to put down traps or things like that. Otherwise, I really never spent much time in there after I'd moved in. As time went on, and I got more used to the place, it actually got easier to ignore the noises. But the weird thing is, it seemed like the more I tried to ignore them, the louder and more obnoxious they became. Every few weeks I found myself going up into the attic to take out the traps, and to be honest with you, I could probably count on one hand the amount of times the traps actually caught something. Eventually I did find out where the animals were getting in from, and I was able to patch the holes and block them off. I kind of figured that would be the end of it. But within the following weeks after I first patched a hole up there, the noises started up again. One night after work, I was laying in bed, and I started to hear the banging noises again. I figured I should call an exterminator in the morning, so I grabbed the nearby phone book and circled one of the numbers. I tore the page out of the phone book and stuck it under my phone, so that way I'd remember to call them in the morning. By the time I had laid back down in bed, I noticed that the noise coming from the attic had changed. This time, it sounded like footsteps. Not full-grown footsteps, but these were more childlike. That's the best way I can describe it, I guess. Very small and very delicate, but very obvious. They sounded just like a child running across the floor, struggling to regain their balance, like the way a toddler runs just after they learn how to walk. At this point, I figured it was just a larger animal, like maybe a raccoon or something. But again, this didn't really sound like an animal. After a few more minutes of this, the footsteps sounded more frantic, more hurried. They went from what sounded like walking to what sounded like skipping, and after a few minutes of that, they started to sound like running. A few moments later, I heard a crashing noise coming from the attic. I quickly opened the attic door, flipped on the light switch, and made my climb up the stairs. By the time I could see over the top stair, I saw what the crashing noise was. Something had knocked over a box of Christmas tree ornaments, and the bulbs had shattered all over the floor, leaving glass everywhere. Again, I was thinking an animal had done this, and as I said, I had already planned to call an exterminator in the morning. I went back downstairs to grab a broom and dustpan, and then made my way back upstairs to clean up the mess. As I began sweeping the glass up, something in one of the dark corners of the attic caught my eye. It was almost like a faint blinking light, flickering on and off, over and over again. It started out as one light, and then it was two lights. They glowed kind of strangely, kind of like how a cat's eyes would glow when you shine a light on them. I finished sweeping up the glass and went back downstairs to grab a flashlight. I made my way back up the stairs, and when I shined my light into the corner where I saw the flashing light coming from, I could finally see what was making the light. There in the corner of the attic was a doll. As I approached it, I noticed that the eyes looked like they were blinking. This freaked me out a little bit, but I still decided to pick the doll up and have a closer look. When I picked the doll up and stood it upright, both the eyes opened up, and when I tilted the doll as if laying it down, both the eyes closed. I had seen these types of dolls when I was a kid. They were the kind that were supposed to look like they were sleeping when you laid them down, and awake when you stood them up. I kinda chuckled about this for a moment, because when I looked at the way the doll was dressed, as well as the eye color and hair color, I noticed that this exactly matched what my cousin had described when she talked about her friend in the attic. I figured that was it. Mystery solved. And again, I had a good laugh about it. I placed the doll back down in the corner and made my way down the stairs, shutting off the light and closing the attic door. Before I'd even taken one step away from the door, I heard something behind me. It was very faint, but very distinct. Like a giggle, or a laugh, a child's laugh, coming from just behind the attic door. I don't know why I did this, but I slowly opened the door back up, and when I looked up at the top of the stairs, I saw it. Two small blinking lights, just like the ones I saw in the corner of the attic where the doll was. Only this time, they were at the top of the stairs, in complete darkness, looking down at me. I quickly slammed and then locked the door, vowing to myself never to open that door up again under any circumstance, and to never go anywhere near that attic. I stayed at that house for maybe another 6 months before moving out, and every night during those 6 months, that banging noise continued. Whenever friends would come over and they'd ask me what was upstairs, I'd always tell them it was storage. And whenever they asked about those banging noises coming from the attic, my reply was always the same. I really need to call an exterminator. I was scared of the dark as a child. It's a common enough fear. Many children share it. The difference is, I was scared not of the darkness and being unable to see in it. It was the things I could see in the dark. As a child, I slept on a love seat in the family room of my home. My mother, Sandy, despite having a room of her own, slept on the couch next to my love seat. A small table connected them in the shape of a reversed letter L. My love seat faced the direction of the TV, which was up against the same wall as our house's fireplace. But there would often not be a fire, and for my first few years, the TV would be turned off at night. The room would be plunged into pure darkness, and in my mother's sweet memory, I say, God, did I hate it. I was a very frightened child, often scared of boogeymen and nightmares like one about a demonic fiend who resembled Zorak from Space Ghost hiding in my fridge, among other dreams. Many a night I awoke from a nightmare and began to see sinister shapes in the shadows against the wall with the fireplace staring at me. Most of these creatures have faded from my memory, but one sticks out in my mind. It was the figure of a cartoonishly tall and thin man with no distinct features, other than what appeared to be a cowboy hat on its head. As time went on, life began to seem scarier than some of my nightmares. Shortly before my 8th birthday, my great-grandmother, who I and my sister Erin called Old Grandma, passed away in her sleep. A few months later, my mother died of breast cancer. After that, my temper grew worse and my thoughts grew darker. I watched horror movies religiously, studying them, and using what I learned to terrify my classmates and neighbors. By the time I had reached high school, my temper and behavior were in better check, though my mouth still often got me in trouble at school. I remember watching a horror movie that featured a character called the Shadow Man, and curious if he was based on a real legend, I Googled him and came across something called shadow people. One thing that caught my attention was that they were often described as wearing a hat. I immediately had a flashback to my strange encounter with the strange shadow as a small boy, and had to wonder, was it really just my imagination? It's been several years since then. I still love to scare people, and most of the time, I have no problem going for long walks in the dead of night, with the trees in my area blocking most of the sky in some areas of the roads and sidewalks. I sleep in a completely dark room, and hate it if light comes in while I'm trying to sleep. Though I'm more insecure about the grave than ghosts these days, I still wonder about that strange evening. My mother told me before she and I moved into the house with the rest of our family that the spirits of a little boy and girl haunted the house, and if a man entered the house, they would either slam doors or be heard running up and down the stairs to the upstairs. My uncle scoffs at the story and refuses to believe it, but sometimes I wonder. I'm a web designer by profession, and this can lead to some very odd hours when multiple projects are going on at the same time. Between testing one, writing code for another, and debugging a third, sometimes I find myself at the office far past when everyone else has left. My badge is not set up for after-hours working, so I have no way back in the building if I leave after 6 p.m. So usually if I work late, whenever I get to a point where I have to leave for food or something, I just call it a night. Last night I found myself working late again. There were a few of us. You tend to see the same people working late, but there was clearly less than usual. At around 8 p.m., it was down to myself and a database architect that was working to push out his last few lines of code for the night. He dropped by to tell me good night and not to stay too late. The usual office chit-chat. I waved goodbye and watched him walk out into the dark night. As is usual with most offices, our lights are motion activated, So one by one, the lights were starting to go out in the building. Fine by me. I have a lamp in my cube for the night, and the ambience helps my eyes. Around 9 or 9:30, I decided I needed some food, so I took my leftover sandwich from lunch and went to the break room to heat it up. Now, we all know most offices have weird noises, servers, building noises, etc. And in the dark and quiet, it's all heightened. But while the microwave was heating up the turkey club I was about to call dinner, I swear I heard footsteps, running. I peeked out into the hallway, and all I could see was dark. Not even the windows letting in moonlight. Just abyss. I heard the ding of the microwave behind me and I almost jumped out of my skin. I turned around, and standing on the other end of the kitchen area was a man. I figured someone else was just working late, so I called out to him that he had scared me half to death. He didn't turn around. He just walked out of the kitchen and back toward the cubicles. I ate my sandwich, laughing about how a cleaning crew guy or a night owl like me had scared me into thinking I saw something. That's when I realized he walked out the door back to the work area, and no lights had come on. I jumped up and ran back out towards my desk, looking everywhere for him. Lights were coming on all over the place and no one was there. That's when I heard the running again. This time, coming from the break room kitchen to the other side of the building. By the time I made it back to the connecting hallway, the sound had stopped, but I was fully spooked. Those were definitely footsteps running, and I know I saw a man here. I packed up for the night and took to looking in the other side of the building just to see. Sure enough, light after light revealed no one else was in the building. I had all but chalked it up to nerves and stress when I heard it again. Running to the front of the office near the bathrooms, the only place still with darkness. I headed up there, and as I turned the corner to the bathrooms, the door was shutting. I found him. I breathed a sigh of relief as I strutted into the bathroom, exclaiming that whoever was working late sure was sketching me out and having a good laugh about it. But then I flipped on the light switch, and the bathroom was empty and silent. The whole office was quiet as ever. I sat down to use the facilities before I left, and what really creeped me out, the seat was warm. Like someone had just been in here using it, not 5 seconds before me.